Create New Age adds some cool new ways to generate and transmit power. It allows us to convert rotation into electricity, which we can then easily transmit through wires and then convert back into rotation. This process isn't 100% efficient though, but I'll go over how to get the efficiency as high as possible. The other big thing that this mod adds is nuclear power, which is really just a big source of heat that you can harness and convert into electricity and rotation. I'll go over the different ways of generating power in this mod, and I'll also show you a step-by-step guide to making a nuclear reactor. In-game, of course. Alright, so to generate electricity in this mod, all you need to do is rotate a generator coil and surround it with magnets. So there's 5 tiers of magnets, and each one is more efficient than the next. There's the magnetite block, the redstone magnet, the layered magnet, the fluctuated magnetite, and the netherite magnet. So here's what a basic setup looks like. So I have a creative motor and it's producing a whole lot of stress units. If we look at the generator coil, we see that it says 33% efficiency, but it's not taking 33% of all the stress that's generated by the motor. It's just 33% of what a single generator coil could take. So right here we have the carbon brushes and it's connected to the generator coil, and that's what allows us to extract all the energy coming out of it. So you'll see energy output is 90 electricity per tick. So there's 20 ticks per second, so multiply that by 20 and that's 1,800 electricity per second. And you see on top of the screen it says energy 1.8 kilo FE. That's 1,800 forge energy. So this mod also produces forge energy, which is also used by many other mods, but in this we'll call it electricity. So connected to the carbon brushes, we have an electrical connector, and there's a wire that connects it all the way here to another connector, and that's on a basic motor. So the basic motor can produce up to 512 stress units, and it's using 15 electricity per tick. Multiply that by 20, that's 300 energy per second. So let's go and build ourselves a simple setup. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this generator coil here, and I'll attach a carbon brush to it, and we'll see it's not generating anything. That's because there's no magnets around it. So if I go ahead and start placing magnets, put 3 of them there, and we have 11% efficiency. So even if you only have a few magnetic blocks, you can still get some efficiency out of there. But let's completely surround it. So to do that, we have to place 3 blocks on each side. So it's going to take 12 blocks to completely encase your generator coil. So you can see now we're at 33% because the efficiency of the magnetite is 33%, and we have carbon brushes. So now there's 1,800 electricity being produced. If I go ahead and I place another generator coil, well, it's taking 6,144 stress units, but this one is only at 0% because there's no magnets around it. So if I go ahead and place some more, we can double our output. So as soon as I place the brushes, we'll see that we have 3,600 energy. So that's a lot more. So what we can start doing is we can place an electrical connector. I'll place a basic motor, place an electrical connector on it, and then I can just right click with copper wire, and we'll have this neat animation, and we just connect it to this connector here. So I'll go ahead and place a stressometer and a speedometer, and we can see that we're generating 512 stress units, and we're using 15 energy per tick. So if I wanted to, I could place another motor and just connect it like this, or I could connect it directly to the brushes. It doesn't matter. And also I'll place this, and we can see, well, it's also powering that motor. I just have to make sure that the motors aren't drawing more energy that's being produced, but if they are, they'll just run less efficiently. So let's have a look at a more realistic setup. So over here, I've connected 4 water wheels, which is something that you might have in a real world, and you can see we're generating 2,048 stress units at 4 RPM. So that translates to us only taking 144 stress units out of the system because this is a very inefficient setup. So we're transmitting this power to this motor, and we're only producing 35 stress units compared to the 512 we had with the creative motors. So a basic setup like this, we're going to need to do something to get more efficiency out of it. So what we can do is actually increase the speed. So if I put a regular water wheel here, we're going to double the speed. So we're only producing a little bit more stress units, but now we doubled the RPM. And what happens is that now we're extracting a lot more stress units out of here. And you can see our motor is producing a lot more. It's producing almost 70 stress units. Okay, so let's have a look at the next tier of magnet. Here we have the redstone magnet, and already we're extracting 192 stress units. If I were to put a small water wheel, this would double. So you can see here, it's getting transferred to this motor, And you can see we're getting about the same amount of stress units as we had on this setup. The next tier is the layered magnet, and that gives us 66% efficiency, which translates to 171 stress units. Next we have the fluctuated magnetite, which gives us 80%. So now we're getting a lot more efficient, but we're still not extracting all that much stress units from our system. So there must be a way to improve upon this. So let's just have a look at this last tier here, the netherite magnet. So this is 92.3% efficient. So that's as efficient as we're gonna get with the generator coil, but there's still ways to get more overall efficiency. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. So here, that gives us 1,127 stress units. By the way, the recipe for netherite magnets is very expensive. You can see the recipes here. I'm using just enough items. If you click on it, you can see it takes netherite scrap as well as some diamonds that have been overcharged. And I'll show you how to do that in this mod as well. Alright, so let's say you want to have a big setup in your world. What would that look like? So here I have some modular diesel engines from the mod Create Diesel Generators, and I'm producing 73,000 stress units. I have 49,000 left over, which means 24,000 is being used by this setup here. So you'll see these generator coils, of which I have 7, are taking in 3,400 each. I've done the math here, that's about 24,000, and they say 33%. So what that 33% refers to is the total stress units that they consume. 33% of that will be converted into usable energy, and I'll show you how that works. So although we go through electricity, you'll see here it's producing 231 electricity per tick. And I have 4 strong motors here, and each one is using about 60, 58. So if you multiply this by 4, you get a number that's pretty close to 231, about 240. So it's not really exact. The amount that's generated here is close to 8,000. So 8,000 is about 33% of 24,000. So this little experiment here proves that the 33% refers to the amount of stress units that it's taking in, and when that's converted to electricity and put out, it's close to that number. So the numbers aren't exact. I don't know if it's because of the rounding in this mod. It might be something that I don't understand, or there's some slight losses. But either way, I found that those numbers are pretty close to what I would expect. Alright, so here's another real life example. Say you want to have a full-size steam engine in your world that's producing 294,000 stress units. So here I'm using up 99% of the stress units produced here. I got as close as I could to 100 without going over. So you'll see I built this setup out of fluctuated magnetite. That's the second highest tier. I didn't want to use the highest tier because my reasoning was that that would just be so expensive because of the netherite required. So probably in your world you might not want to have a huge setup like this with netherite. You'd want to have probably the second highest tier, which is a lot more affordable. So this tier is 80% efficient. So what that translates to is that you can have up to 36,000 stress units. Wow, that's not very much, right? So you're putting in 290,000, but you're only getting 36 out. And yet we're using all the energy, aren't we? Yeah, we are using the energy because there's none left in the carbon brushes. So there's an important thing to keep in mind is that the speed that your rotation is going in is very relevant. So here, the steam engine is only producing 48 RPM. So we're really not getting that much efficiency out of our system. And I'm not talking about this efficiency number, I'm talking about overall efficiency. So I'm gonna go ahead and flick this lever, and we're gonna stop this, and we're gonna do an experiment. We're gonna see what happens when we put up our speed to 256 RPM. So we've got a speed controller right here, and I'll flick this lever on this clutch. So you can see we're actually using 100% of the capacity. And I'm using these reinforced motors along with motor extensions to get more stress units out of the system. So here we have the carbon brushes, and we can see that all the energy is being used. And with these motors, we're able to get 196,000 stress units out of it. That's a lot better. So we had 294, we converted it into electricity, and we're getting 196. So that's a lot better. That's about 2/3 of the total energy. But can we do better? Yes, we can. So how do we do better? Well, we have to use the highest tier. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off here. And we're going to look at this netherite magnet setup. And you can see when you use netherite and a high RPM, you don't actually need that many. So we're still running at 256 here. And what is our output? So we're using all the stress units, and our output is 262,000 stress units. Okay. and we're using all the available energy. So wow, that's pretty good. So what's the math on that? So actually, when you have 256 RPM and the highest tier of magnet, which is netherite, you get a total efficiency of 88.8%. Even though it says here it's 92.3, there's some losses somewhere, and I haven't quite worked out where those losses are or if it's just some rounding error in the code. But either way, we get pretty close to our ideal efficiency. So if you want the highest efficiency, not only do you need the higher tier magnets, but you need a high RPM. So that covers the basics of electrical power generation in this mod. I'm gonna get to the nuclear power stuff in not too long, but I wanna show you some other things that this mod adds. So this mod adds solar power, so you can have basic solar plates or advanced solar plates. And what that does is it takes in the heat from the sun. So they're only active during daytime when there's sun hitting them. So we see a new unit of energy, degrees T. So I'm just gonna call that temperature. So you can see the basic one is producing 420 temperature and the advanced one is producing 1300. So what can you do with this temperature? Well, you see here I have a bunch of plates and I'm piping it using heat pipes. So by looking at each pipe, we can see the temperature in each one. And up here I have a Stirling engine. So a Stirling engine takes the temperature and converts that into rotation. So this is very basic. You get 1024 stress units. Okay, what else can we do? Well, you can put a boiler heater and you can actually power a steam engine with it. So you can take the heat and convert it into rotation by using a steam engine. So this does a pretty decent job. I mean, it's very small. It produces a small amount of heat, but it's enough to power a steam engine, and you can produce a lot more heat than just what I have here. This is a pretty basic setup. You can go a lot bigger and you can even concentrate the heat more, which I'll show you how to do, but you have to be careful. All right, so what I've done is I've set up a Stirling engine here and I'm gonna concentrate the heat into it. So what I do is I place a heat pump and there's this little arrow here. I'm just gonna rotate it until it's pointing towards the Stirling engine. All right, so right now it's pumping heat this way. We're up to 4,000 temperature. There's a total of 10,000 temperature. So once that hits 10,000, we'll see what's gonna happen. All right, so our temperature is going up. It's close to 10,000. It's already red. In just a second, we're gonna see what happens when we get too high. So we've reached the limit, and what happens is the stuff just melts. It got too hot. Just turns to lava. I'm gonna place a few blocks to get rid of that. So just keep in mind when you're using temperature, when you're playing with heat, you got to be careful not to overheat your system, otherwise it's going to melt and turn into lava. Alright, so now I'm going to go over some setups for how to craft some of the key items in this mod. I'm not going to go over everything, but if you install a mod like just enough items, you can click on something and see how to craft it. So over here, I have a basic setup for making copper wire. Copper wire is used to transmit electricity. So you simply take some copper sheets and pass them through a mechanical saw and you've got your copper wire. Now, if you want to transmit more power, you're going to need something like overcharged diamond wire to do that. And that requires a bit more involved setup. So what you need to do is you take some diamonds and you used an energizer to give it energy. So basically you just feed the energizer with some electricity and you provide it with rotation and it'll beam the electricity into the diamond until it turns into a new item. It turns into overcharged diamond. And you simply continue passing that through mechanical saws, energizers, 3 times until you get as your output overcharged diamond wire. Alright, so I'll get to how to build a nuclear reactor in just a bit, but first we need to find out how to make the fuel. So how does that work? Well, this mod adds thorium ore. So you have to go mine some thorium ore, and what you do is you pass that thorium ore through some crushing wheels, and you have a chance at getting this here, which is radioactive thorium. So what you need to do is take that radioactive thorium, press it, and then once it's been pressed, you add some iron sheet to it, and then you press it again, and then you have some nuclear fuel. Alright, so now that we have our nuclear fuel, we can power our nuclear reactor. So here's a nuclear reactor that I built, and there's a few components that we're gonna go over. So what we need to do is we need to build a base of reactor casing. And then we feed the fuel into the reactor fuel inserter. So you need to put something like a funnel to be able to take in the fuel. So this shows how much is stored. We currently have 150. That fuel goes into the reactor rods and you can see they're heating up. and I've surrounded them with reactor heat vents. So you probably won't need this many, but my reactor was getting really hot, so I just spammed a bunch of heat vents to take away the heat. Because if your reactor gets too hot, you can have a nuclear meltdown, which I'll show you later on. So I've piped a bunch of heat using heat pumps to these boiler heaters, and this is a full-size steam engine. And you see, I'm producing 294,000 stress units. So a nuclear reactor is enough to power a full-size steam engine. So actually, I say nuclear reactor, but this is a nuclear reactor with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 reactor rods. So the first one I built was smaller. I think it had 3 or 4 reactor rods, and it wasn't really enough to power this steam engine. So with that nuclear reactor, I'm getting 294,000 stress units plus a few thousand from these Stirling engines. So that's what a nuclear reactor does. It produces heat. You then must convert that heat into rotation, which, if you want to, you can convert into electricity. So now that I've shown you the basics of how a nuclear reactor works, let's build one. The first step is to place down our reactor casing. So we're going to place it 3 wide, and for this one, we're going to go 5 long. So this is going to be a small nuclear reactor, a basic design, just to show you the basics of how it works. Next, we place the reactor rods. So we're going to place them horizontally. This one's vertical. I'm going to fix that. And then what we need to do is we need to place the reactor inserter, the reactor fuel inserter. So we place it this way so that it lines up with the reactor rods. At the end of the reactor rods, we're going to place the reactor heat vent. So that's going to take the heat from the reactor, and we're going to be able to pipe that out. So I'm going to place some heat pipes, and I'm going to send them over to this steam engine here. And that's going to help dissipate the heat, because if we don't dissipate the heat is just going to accumulate and we'll have a nuclear meltdown. All right, so this is actually all you need to have a reactor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start feeding it with this fuel. Oh, we have to remember to put on the funnel, otherwise the fuel will not go into the fuel inserter. So the next step is to actually give it fuel, and once we give it fuel, it's going to turn on. So you see these reactor rods are now producing heat. So right now the heat is gradually making its way to the steam engine. You can see we're already at level 9. If I go ahead and place some heat pumps, it's going to heat up faster. It's going to send the heat directly in this direction instead of just gradually dissipating. So I don't know how high we'll be able to get. Maybe level 9 is as high as it can go. So you see it's shooting up and falling down. That's because as it heats up, it's using up more heat. So it takes a while to stabilize. So we're getting pretty close to max power with just this size of reactor. So that's quite good, the amount of heat that you can get with just 3 reactor rods. Okay, so let's go over radiation and meltdowns. So for radiation, so if this was survival, I would be taking damage right now. If I were to wear leather armor, that would protect me. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to place a sheep, and this poor sheep is getting damaged by radiation. That's just too bad. Poor sheep. Okay, so how do we prevent radiation? Well, we can use reactor glass. So we just place the reactor glass around here and completely encase this thing. And once we do that, well, when I place a sheep, the sheep's going to be all right. All right, so that is how radiation works. You simply place some reactor glass, and that will shield any living creature, whether hostile or passive, from the radiation. Okay, so what about nuclear meltdowns? Well, a meltdown just happens when there's too much heat. So if we look at this, we can see, all right, it can go up to 26,000 degrees, and the temperature is rising and then dropping. That's because we have this reactor vent, which is able to extract 1,800 degrees, I guess, per second or tick at the moment. So you see the reactor heat vent is getting pretty hot, but let's just see what happens if we remove the reactor heat vent. Well, these are heating up pretty quickly, so there's still time to save it. We can still add some cooling, but let's see what a reactor meltdown looks like. So we're already at 17,000 degrees, and it just turned yellow. As the temperature rises, it'll turn orange and eventually red just before the meltdown occurs. So we're at 25,000 degrees. The indicator has turned red. We're only a few hundred degrees away from meltdown temperature. So now we've hit 26,000, and what's happened is that the reactor rods have turned into corium. So corium is what results when a reactor rod goes through a meltdown. And you see here, it's slowly falling down. It's falling through the ground. It's melting the reactor casing beneath it. So they're affected by gravity. They fall down. So there you have it, that's the basics of Create New Age. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, then please consider subscribing and activating notifications. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me there as well. Thank you for watching.